Before I start with Chapter 7, let me give you some more background information. So you can see in the previous chapter, you can see the evidence, this wasn't a surprise attack. Japan did something, United States retaliated. When the United States retaliated, Japan retaliated back. When Japan retaliated back, the United States retaliated again. So you can see this wasn't, it wasn't like Japan didn't do anything, United States didn't do anything, and then Japan attacked Pearl Harbor instead. For several years, there was this back and forth between the United States and Japan. Also, both of my parents were educated in Japan. So in Japan, unlike the United States, Japan, they told the whole truth. In the days leading up to the attack, Japan did send airplanes. They took photographs. They sent them back to Japan, and they saw exactly which ships are where in Pearl Harbor. And on the morning when the airplane flew back to Hawaii, some of those ships were not there. So that you cannot say that's just a coincidence. That means the United States did know Japan was going to attack Pearl Harbor, and they discreetly moved the most important ships out of that harbor. So that is something that's not discussed here in the United States, but in Japan, they did tell the truth. So let me go over Chapter 7, Crisis. Eugene Victor Debs Rostow, he was a legal scholar and a civil servant. He was appointed Dean of Yale Law School. Under President Johnson, he was an undersecretary for the State of Political Affairs. During the 1970s, he was a leader of the movement against relaxing the strained relationship between the former Soviet Union. Under Reagan, he was director of the Arms Control and Disarmament Agency. He passed away at the age of 89 in 2002. Now, regarding this, he said that the incarceration of persons of Japanese ancestry was based on a record which would not justify a conviction for stealing a dog. So, December 7, 1941, Pearl Harbor was attacked by Japan. The next day, the United States declared war on Japan. 2 months later, the President signed Executive Order 9066, ordered all persons of Japanese ancestry to leave the West Coast without any charges or due process of law. Authors note, there are a number of publications which questions how the Bill of Rights was breached. However, for this purpose of this book, only the historical framework of the event is used to explore the Nisei's experience within it. And you can easily just Google it, or you can read history books, political books about this. The United States government's own investigative commission found this conclusion was based on civilian politicians rather than military judgments. The decision was not based on the analysis of military conditions. The consensus was that the decision was based on racial prejudice, war hysteria, and failure of political leadership. Japanese Americans are the same as main Japan Japanese. Racist groups, powerful agricultural labor interests, felt threatened by the inroads made by the resident Japanese. Attitudes about Japanese Americans were swayed based on what's happening between the United States and Japan. When the United States ended immigration from Japan, Japan was outraged. Next several years, Japan won several wars in Asia. The United States reacted with hostility and fear. Then Secretary of War Henry L. Stimson asked for retaliation against Japanese immigrants. It was understandable that the people were hostile against the Issei. However, people could not visually tell the difference between Issei and Nisei. Lieutenant John DeWitt said that there's no way to determine the loyalty. He said that all of them are still Japanese and that can't change with any piece of paper. And this was justified removing all of them from the West Coast. There was a chant going on. Remember Pearl Harbor. there was a firestorm of hostility toward Japanese Americans on the West Coast, and people chanted this repeatedly. It also had a profound effect on the Nisei, who felt that they personally had something to do with it. They felt frightened and guilty about all of this hate and ugly mood. They also carried racial guilt, being born of a race that was despised by other citizens. The attack served to heighten the sense of legal and moral blame. Ms. Agata said that she went to a movie theater that afternoon. However, the movie was frequently interrupted with announcements of Navy personnel to report to their ships. Ms. Sone said that this opened up an old wound. She knew her birthright would not protect her from the consequences of war. Ms. Utsumi said that her relationship with her white neighbor was civil at best. However, as soon as the news spread, her neighbor was very angry, as though she was the one who attacked that harbor. The FBI boarded up their door, and they spent the rest of the war feeling as though their every move was being watched. It was never explained to them why their door was boarded up. However, they later learned that all dentists were under suspicion, and her father was one of those dentists. Blackouts and anti-rape sirens on both sides of the coast heightened public anxiety. Japanese Americans became a target, and at least 9 deaths were attributed because the victims were Japanese. The Nisei were also targeted because they were in public places. They were conditioned to being treated like enemy aliens, and they weren't daunted by wartime propaganda. However, they were prevented from making a livelihood. Many were fired from their jobs. Employers told gardeners that their services are no longer needed. The civil service fired them without any hearing or accusation. Ms. Senzaki said that she was given her last paycheck. They were fired and scared. On their way home, they had to walk around barricades to get home. The next day, her father burned all the books he brought from Japan. Although her mother said that nothing would happen to her due to her citizenship, they were sent to a detention camp and later on to a concentration camp. She endured being separated from her parents and family. Her husband experienced a life-threatening blood clot near his ear. Around this time, more than 1,800 Issei men were arrested. Most never heard what they were charged of wrongdoing. The Justice Department just kept moving them from one camp to another. Ms. Tomihiro talked about her father's arrest. She felt disbelief, powerless, and betrayed. The purpose of the roundup of immigrant men and freezing bank assets was to disable the community. This forced businesses to close, deprive the community of resources, leadership, and infrastructure. Organizations such as the American Legion, Daughters of the American Revolution, Native Sons and Daughters of the Golden West fueled hatred among the resurrected racist groups. All demanded Japanese people be excluded from the West Coast. Newspaper press also seconded that. February 13th, the West Coast Congressional Delegation recommended to the President that all persons of Japanese ancestry be removed from the West Coast. This was seconded by then Attorney General Executive Order 9066. The unthinkable happened. Then President signed the order, gave the Secretary of War the authority to designate military areas within the United States to relocate everyone who is seen as prejudicial to national defense. Of those, over 112,000 Japanese Americans were forced out of their homes in California, Washington, Oregon, into concentration camps. For the Issei, this was one more example of the heavy-handed treatment they received ever since they came into this country. For the Nisei, they were stunned. They were not prepared for the sweeping inclusiveness of the order. Granted that the one Japanese American organization did play a controversial role that led them into the concentration camp has come under fire by both historians and the community. Without Issei leadership, the Nisei had no choice. They had to look to the JCL for guidance. However, JCL did not have enough time to come up with a position regarding this order. Also, they did provide informers to the FBI, and the JCL said that their hands were tied. Either they have the Japanese Americans comply with the military orders or be seen as the enemy as well. Second roundup, Ms. De Cristoforo said it all didn't make any sense to incarcerate law-abiding citizens. Ms. Mulao, who was 15 years old at the time, she and her 2 younger brothers were orphans, were sent from one family to another. Their sister was in the hospital being treated for tuberculosis. In order for her to see her sister, her foster parents had to go to the Western Defense Command to travel to Salem, Oregon. After a significant amount of delay, she was finally allowed to see her sister, only to find out that her sister had already passed away. The sanatorium staff claimed to not know where her sister's body is. No death certificate, nothing. Ms. Sateishi and her family decided to head east to Colorado. However, with news of people being rounded up daily, they had to sell everything quickly, except at whatever price they were offered for their belongings. Professor Kitano asks, what else could they have done? So questions, comments, constructive criticisms, asking for clarification, let me know. In a couple of days, I will go over the next chapter. Take care.